Welcome, fellow humans. Today I'm going to talk about how people think. As a child, and as an adult for that matter, I've been really curious about how universal various experiences are. People tend to assume that their basic experiences will be true for other people, but a lot of the time when you actually ask other people, you find a bunch of differences. As a child, I started wondering, do other people think the same way that I do? Not about the same things, because the answer to that was obviously no, they don't, but is the actual process of thinking the same for them as it is for me? And so I started asking people, and have continued doing so throughout my life, how do you think? And when I ask them, they usually go, huh? What do you mean? And then I have to give them some explanations. But I've found that there are a few different ways that tend to be reasonably common. I actually have a very, very common way of thinking, which is an internal monologue. I actually do hear a voice in my head that is stating my thoughts. That voice sounds a lot like my own voice, but not quite. And I can make it sound different with effort, and I can make it sound different without effort if I'm thinking of a quote from a specific character and then I can kind of hear it in their voice and things like that. And sometimes I can lock into how somebody else that I know speaks and then hear that voice. But most of the time, the voice is similar to how I hear my own voice in my head, but not quite the same. It's a little bit nicer, which is something that I appreciate. Um, and many other people also will hear thoughts in their head. But when I asked people, I also came across people who said that they think in images. That really surprised me at the time, because while I can come up with images in my head, I do have a mind's eye, it's difficult for me. I can get a greater level of detail if I stop and think about it, but I certainly can't do my day-to-day thinking in images. And of course, not everybody has a mind's eye, which is one of the interesting things that I learned by asking people about this. The even more surprising thing was to learn that some people think in text. They have actual visual text of their thoughts. I assume that this had to develop after they learned how to read, and I don't know what they used before that, although my internal monologue had to develop after I learned how to speak. And I have some idea of what I was using before that, just a much less efficient method of thinking, which was abstract. I do also know someone who uses pure abstraction to think. There are no senses involved. He does have aphantasia, which is the lack of a mind's eye, so that probably is a significant factor. He also seems to be lacking other mental senses for the most part, with the exception that he has said that he has a very good ability to listen to music in his head. He says that he can listen to it with the level of playback that he can notice details in it that he didn't think about the first time, that he basically can hear songs the same way that they actually play in reality in his head, which I do envy a bit. My ability to hear songs in my head is significantly worse. It is very difficult for me to hear anything but a cappella. I find this a little weird. I guess it's part of my brain being so verbally focused, having an internal monologue, so I can hear the lyrics parts, and I can hear a certain amount of the instrumental if I basically hear it done as voices, which is a little weird, but it makes music in my head generally have a much lower quality than actually listening to music. I'm really curious if there are other ways of thinking that I haven't encountered yet, possibly some really rare ones, for your general day-to-day thoughts. There are other methods that the brain uses for things other than thinking through things. Like most people will have an auditory playback loop where you can hear the last bit of whatever you heard. It's part of why you can say something out loud to yourself to help you remember it in the short term, so that you can, say, dial a phone number. But the general day-to-day thoughts, most people will have some method that they use primarily. But most people will have access to more than one method, and you might use one method for one type of task and another method for another type of task. So that's not too weird if you do, just as I have my primary internal monologue, but I can use more abstract thoughts when I can't find good words, and I can use visual thinking if I put a bunch of effort into it. And for some tasks, I might have to do that even though I'm not as good at it. I've also wondered about how people experience that sensation of thinking and their thoughts, because another thing that I found a little interesting is that a lot of my thoughts do have a more tactile feel to them as well. For me, it's often significantly about density. A thought that's really important or has a lot of weight to it, well, that's it feels like it has a lot of weight to it if it has a lot of weight to it. And that is one of the things I've wondered about. A lot of the times when people have these language choices that express how they are thinking, people who don't think that way will think they're metaphorical, while other people see them as expressions of how they're thinking. And for things like something is weighty, I don't know if I just happen to think that way and that's unusual, or if lots of other people do, and only the people who don't think that way think it's a metaphor. A lot of people thought that an internal monologue was a metaphor until there was so many people coming out and saying, no, I have one. I actually do hear words in my head. And I imagine for people who have none of the vision or the hearing or other senses in their head, it's probably a little hard to explain what the difference is between real senses and ones in your head, because I do know the difference, and other people do know the difference. There is a difference, and yet it is actually vision in my head. It is actually hearing in my head. And because I tend to think in an auditory manner, I tend to hear thoughts in my head, it is possible for me to miss real world sounds because they were drowned out by my own thinking. So I don't know if that happens to people who don't have that kind of thinking, and I don't know if people who think more visually sometimes have any conflict with actual real world sight. They certainly seem to be able to function just fine. You can't tell from looking at somebody or what they're capable of whether or not they think in a particular way. The person I know who has no mind's eye is still able to mentally rotate objects if he's looking at them. So he's still able to do the sorts of tasks that would seem difficult without that method of thinking. There seem to be a lot of different ways to get to the same end results, and I don't think any particular way of thinking is inherently better or worse. I do wonder how they develop, why some people have one method and some people have another. I think there are probably some environmental effects. Certainly literacy has to affect how many people have a visual text-based method of thinking. But beyond that, it's really hard to guess about these things. I've just always found the topic really fascinating, and given that most people haven't asked lots and lots of other people about this, I thought other people might find it interesting to hear about how my brain works and how some other people's brains seem to work, as best as I can tell by asking them. Anyhow, that was my story, and if you liked it, please click like, and if you know someone who might be interested in it, please share. In this case, I would especially love to read comments, since every single one of you who is watching this does think in some way or form. And of course, if you would like more similar content, then subscribe. Thank you.